from District 24 and House candidates from 24A. I'm Brad Meyer. I'm the president of the Owatonna Chamber of Commerce, and again I want to welcome you here tonight. The format is as follows for this evening. Each candidate will be given 2 minutes to make an opening statement, and then following that we're going to have the coalition give a short presentation on a few of the key issues that they have before going into the Q&A with the candidates. After that presentation, we'll ask those questions. Each candidate will have a 2-minute response. Will be timed with yellow card will be 30 seconds and the red will be to stop. And then we'll stop you at that point. So let's introduce our candidates this evening. We have Vicki Jensen and Vern Swedien for Senate District 24. And Craig Brendan and John Petersburg running for House District 24A. And let's start with your introductions and your opening statements. And Vicki, we'll start with you.
Okay. Thank you, Brad, and thank you for hosting this event and for the Coalition of Greater Minnesota Cities holding this event and inviting me here today. I'm Vicki Jensen. I'm a wife and a mother of 3. Miranda's a senior at Winona State University. Ryan is a freshman at Rochester Technical College, and then we have Benjamin, who's a very active 3rd grader. My husband Trevor and I own and operate an independent insurance agency here in Owatonna. I'm running for state senate because I've been working on policy issues at the local level for about the past 10 years, and I would really like to continue that work at the state level. I serve on the Owatonna School Board because I believe we need to have lifelong learning opportunities. I serve as Secretary-Treasurer of Steele County Farmers Union because I value family farms and I really believe that we must strengthen them and save them if we're going to remain economically viable. I serve as the Legislative Chair of Minnesota Business Women because I value the diversity that we have in our area, and I believe that we must have a voice in the policies that impact our lives. I also served on the Board of Directors and as Public Policy Chair of the Chamber of Commerce, because I believe as business owners we have to also take an active role in trying to fulfill and solve some of the complex problems that we're facing. One of the things that I did have done also is I graduated from a program called Leadership Owatonna, and it was a great experience. What they did is they taught us some of the things, they called it, instead of strengths and weaknesses, it was our natural talents. And the 3 things that I want to point out is I'm a lifelong learner. That was what came out of that class. So I think that is one reason I value lifelong learning for everybody. I also learned that I have the ability, and one of my natural talents is to take a complex issue, break it down, find the relationships between each of them, and then be able to communicate that to others. I think that's a great skill to have as a legislator. So with that, thank you for having me, and I look forward to this conversation.
Thank you, Vicki. Vern?
Hi, I'm Vern Swedien, and I am married to my beautiful bride, Darcy. We have been married now 20 years. We have the exact same anniversary as President and Mrs. Obama. So, how's that? We have 2 wonderful kids here in the community. They go to they're in the Owatonna school system. And the reason I wanted to get involved in politics, I've been an entrepreneurial spirit in the state my whole life. My father owned a construction company that his father started with his 6 brothers, and so I grew up around working hard, and being a workaholic is a good thing in politics. There's always something to do. There's like 50 different things to do all at the same time, so I love the complexity. I love coming together and having great debates and great conversations to find out what can happen and what can be created to do something different. I found that government isn't always the most efficient means to the solution, and that priorities should always be our guide. And I would like to think that 67 state senators could come together and look at complex issues and say, you know what, the real priority is this, and let's drop our party lines and agree on what the real priorities are, and have that common opportunity to serve the state and the 79,011 people in our district. Business tax reform. As a business owner and a consultant to many businesses within this state, I found that Minnesota has not done a great job at remaining really competitive in that business tax climate. So I'm hoping that we can shift that, change that, and make Minnesota a place to do business. Excuse me, I'm getting a cold, so I'm not as chipper and wonderful as I usually am. But I'm excited to be here, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Swedien. I'll be a little more formal. Sorry, I called you Vern before.
You can call me Vern.
Okay, all right. Mr. Brendan.
Good evening, I'm Craig Brendan, and I'm excited to be here in this format with you folks and talk about the things that we hold dear to our hearts. I'm very honored to be here with my wife, Karen, joining me here this evening. We have 2 children. Our oldest son, Jacob, is serving in the Marine Corps in Okinawa, Japan right now. Actually today he's in Korea, but he's traveling all over. Our daughter, Kirsten, graduates this spring from Wasika High School, so we're the empty nesters coming up very quickly. We're looking forward to that aspect. I'm a farm boy from West Central Minnesota. I know the values of work, hard work, getting things done, digging in and doing the work that needs to be done to solve the problems. I believe in the 3 C's, communication and cooperation build stronger communities for us here in our district and across the state. When we look at each other across the fence and say, hey, what can I do to help you out? How can we work together? Let's figure out what will happen when we do that. Where can we go? What will we be able to accomplish? That's my goal. That's what I haven't been seeing happening in our legislature the past few years, is that we've been so having them so busy fighting each other and not getting things done for the people of the state, the people of our district. We need to get back to those ideals of working together, knocking out things that are going to be beneficial to everybody across the state.
Thank you, Mr. Brendan. Mr. Petersburg.
Thank you, Brad, and thank you to all of you who showed up tonight on this cool, brisk evening. My name is John Petersburg, and I am also running for House District 24A. I've been a lifelong resident in this area, either Claremont or now presently in Wasika, and I've also been the church administrator at Trade Lutheran Church for the last 15 years. And as you know, that can be kind of tense and has a lot of struggles and decisions that have to be made too. Somebody once asked me exactly why I wanted to run, and I said, well, after the politics of the church, I think the legislature might be easier. And sometimes that's true, but the reality is that this community and this area has been very good to me. It has supported me, and it has helped me weather through some of the life challenges through it. And with that, it has given me a lot of experience. It's given me a lot of understanding about what this community is about, who we are, what we're looking for. It has also given me the ability, especially through church and the church politics, to be able to look at alternatives, to be able to look outside the box, to bring people together, to find ways in which, at the end of the day, we not only accomplish something, but we all feel good about it. And I think that's something that we are hearing a lot about, not happening at the state legislature. And yet, we need to do that. We need to find alternatives. We need to come together and understand that as a society, as a people, we live next to each other. We go to church next to each other. So what I bring to this table is an ability to get things done, to be able to look at outside the box issues and make sure that everything that we need to do and prioritize gets done. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, candidates, for your opening statements. I'm now going to introduce Amanda Dewar from the Coalition of Greater Minnesota Cities. She's going to deliver a brief presentation on local government aid, property taxes, the state budget, economic development, and Highway 14. We promise it's a brief one, but that's a lot of things to cover. And then when we're done with that, we're going to ask you some questions pertaining to those issues.
Give me the cards, though, because I want to time this.
I should do it in 2 minutes. I will try to be as brief as I can now. Thank you, everybody. My name is Amanda Dewar. I'm a lobbyist with the Coalition of Greater Minnesota Cities. I'm here just to give a brief presentation on the issues that the questions will be about tonight. But first, about the Coalition of Greater Minnesota Cities. It is a non-profit, nonpartisan advocacy organization made up of city officials throughout 80 cities in Greater Minnesota. We support fair property taxes, good land use planning, sensible environmental regulation, a balanced transportation system, and effective economic development. We're hosting a series of candidate forums throughout Greater Minnesota to educate candidates on issues that are important to Greater Minnesota cities and also give the public an opportunity to learn the candidates' positions on these issues. The first topic I'm going to talk about is local government aid, also commonly known as LGA, which is state funding that's distributed to cities to keep property taxes low and help pay for city services. It's distributed on a formula based on a city's need and their ability to raise revenue. So their property tax base and valuations are factored into that. So the cities with the highest needs and or lower tax bases receive the most local government aid. And the reason that we have local government aid is there's quite a bit of disparity among Minnesota cities on their ability to raise revenue. As you can see from the graph, for every percentage point in property tax, the city of Browns Valley can only raise $1.88 per person, whereas the wealthy community of East Gull Lake can raise over $60. Most of the cities in this region here fall in the middle, but even then there's some disparity between Owatonna and Waseca and Rochester, for example. This graph shows with what would happen without LGA, and that's property taxes would increase dramatically and unevenly throughout the state. So you can see how property tax rates in this region would be affected if there was no LGA. This shows of the state general fund budget, only 2% of that goes towards funding local government aid. And the vast majority of general fund spending is in K-12 education and health and human services. And even though it is only 2% of the state budget, local government aid has been subject to some significant cuts in the past 10 years. It used to be funded at $565 million a year back in 2002. Today, only $425 million. And had we kept pace with inflation, LGA would receive $817 million in funding per year. This graph also shows how local government aid funding has gone down in the past 10 years. And another property tax relief program, the Market Value Homestead Credit, which was actually eliminated by the legislature in 2011. Funding for that has also decreased. And an interesting point about both of those programs is that the funding for those programs went vastly to Greater Minnesota. About 60% of the funding for those two programs went to Greater Minnesota, whereas the homeowners property tax refund program, which the funding has gone up 304%, goes primarily about 65 to 70% to the metro area. So there's been a little bit of imbalance in where the cuts have been made. Now I'm going to talk about the state budget and how that relates to property taxes. I'm sure you all remember the government shutdown of 2011 where they had to balance the $5.1 billion budget deficit, and this graph shows how that was done. $2.2 billion was shifted from education, $640 million was borrowed in future tobacco bond revenues, and $1.8 billion in spending reductions, and then a little bit of use of reserves and revenue increases. Then, from 2011 to 2012, there was a $370 million property tax increase across Minnesota, and $291 million of that is attributable to reductions in state aids and credit. This means these were property taxes that were being paid by the state and now are being paid by a homeowner, business owner, and farmer. Of the $370 million, only $54 million was the result in an increase in a local levy, and that includes school districts, cities, and counties. If we take only cities, that's only $15 million increase of the total $370 million. This graph shows how property taxes from 2011 to 2012 rose much more dramatically in greater Minnesota than the metro area, largely, as I discussed before, because the programs that were targeted for cut largely went to the metro, or to the greater Minnesota. And I'm sure everyone has heard how revenues have come in above expectations for the current budget cycle, about $1.2 billion. And by law, those extra revenues are directed in certain areas. $255 million will go towards filling the cash flow, $626 million towards the budget reserves, and the remaining $318 million will go back toward paying back the schools. But in the next budget cycle, which the legislature will begin working on next January, there is a projected $1.1 billion budget deficit. If you add in inflation to that, that's an extra $1.06 billion. And if you consider the funds that need to be repaid to schools, that's another $2.43 billion, bringing the total to $4.6 billion in the red. So many lawmakers have talked about funding some property tax relief programs, but it's important to note that any spending on property tax relief further increases the deficit. Like, there's been discussion of eliminating the statewide business property tax. That would cost $1.6 billion and then would raise the deficit to over $6 billion. Other lawmakers have talked about restoring the market value homestead credit. That would cost about $530 million, so then again raise the deficit to over $5 billion. And I'm going to talk about economic development next, because there is a demonstrated need for targeted economic development programs specifically tailored for greater Minnesota, because there's some unique demographic characteristics. There's an older workforce, a less educated workforce, and lower income levels in greater Minnesota. And the entrepreneurs in greater Minnesota have a harder time attracting capital. For instance, the Angel Investment Tax and Credit Program, which was created by the legislature in 2010, is underperforming in greater Minnesota. This graph shows in the first year of the program, 80% of the funding went to the metro area, and 88% of the businesses that received an investment from the program were in the metro area. So in response to some of these issues that greater Minnesota has had attracting economic development opportunities, the Coalition of Greater Minnesota Cities worked with local chambers of commerce, economic development authorities, and small businesses throughout greater Minnesota to put together a 5-point plan to promote economic development in greater Minnesota. And we had a lot of success with these proposals in the last legislative session and received strong bipartisan support. Some of these included the Greater Minnesota Internship Program, which would provide incentives to small businesses to hire an intern from a Minnesota college, university, or tech school and help draw those talented workers out into greater Minnesota. There's the New Employee Job Training Program, which provides incentives for small businesses to train their new hire employees. And then we also propose expanding the Angel Investment Tax Credit Program to double the tax credit for investments made in a greater Minnesota new business. Two of these initiatives, the Greater Minnesota Internship Program and the expansion of the Angel Investment Tax Credit, were included in the final omnibus tax bill, which was ultimately vetoed by the governor for reasons unrelated to these proposals. But because of the strong bipartisan support, these will likely be major parts of the CTMC's legislative agenda in the next legislative session. And the final issue I'm going to talk about is Highway 14. And when I talk about Highway 14, there's two segments between North Mankato and New Ulm and Owatonna to Dodge Center that need to be expanded from 2-lane to 4-lane. Why does it need to be expanded? Well, for safety reasons. Since 2010, 2001, there have been 43 fatalities and 47 serious injury crashes along the corridor of Highway 14 between Rochester and Newhall. And in the area closest to us, the unfinished segment between Owatonna and Dodge Center, there have been 8 fatalities in that time frame, and the fatality rate is nearly double the statewide average. There's a great deal of traffic growth occurring on the corridor between Owatonna and Dodge Center, and then the traffic rates are expected to double by 2030. And this graph shows the blue is current traffic, and the red is what is being projected. And more importantly, the heavy truck traffic is expected to double. Another reason that Highway 14 expansion is needed is the growth in the region. The cities, as you can see from the graph along Highway 14, have experienced significant population growth and are projected to grow even more by 2020. The population of Owatonna is expected to increase 16% by 2020. And the economic growth within the communities on the corridor has been notable too, with a great increase in business and sales. And why is 4-lane expansion the solution? Well, you guys drive Highway 14 every day, but you know that the small piecemeal investments, they put the lights and the rumble strips in places, but those don't meet the needs of the growing economy, the growing population, and the growing traffic on the corridor. And so we need to position the highway for the future to meet our needs. And the 2 segments that have yet to be finished, the environmental impact statements for both of those segments are completed. So work could begin if the money was there. So we need to not waste the money that was spent on preparing those environmental impact statements and begin moving forward. Which brings us to the MnDOT 20-year plan, which the Department of Transportation is working on right now, their 20-year highway investment plan, which will guide how money is spent for the next 2 decades. And a draft is expected in March 2013 and the final report in May. But unfortunately, the department's strategy is moving away from big expansion projects like Highway 14 to smaller, less expensive safety solutions like the rumble strips and things of that nature. But there are some real consequences if Highway 14 isn't included in the 20-year plan. Mostly because no state, local, or federal money could be spent on the highway because it would be seen as inconsistent with MnDOT priorities. And if it's not in the plan, it ignores the growth of the region, the economy, and the traffic concerns. And it would waste the previous investments that have been put into the corridor for decades and decades to get it ready for 4-lane expansion. So basically, failing to complete Highway 14 would cripple the regional economy and make the road more dangerous. So thank you for enduring my brief presentation. And I'm going to turn it back over to Brad for the questions.
Okay, thank you, Amanda.
I have a question, Brad.
Yes.
Would it be easier for the candidates to see the signs if you move over here?
Yep, I'm
Yes.
glad we got it.
Slide there.
Oh, we don't pay attention to those.
Oh, yes. All right. So first question, you still want the job? After all? All right. Okay, that's good. We actually have a unique situation where we have no incumbent for either seat, so this is exciting to get your take on these issues. So a reminder, you have 2 minutes to answer these, and we'll start these questions with our Senate candidates, and then we'll work over to the House. So the first question, we'll start with you, Mr. Swedien. The first question is, as you've seen, cities have a wide disparity in their ability to raise revenue from their property tax base. They also have different levels of need for services. The LGA program, which is designed to address these issues, has been cut substantially over the last decade, as we just saw. Do you support the concept of LGA? And secondly, would you support increasing LGA by at least $100 million, which is still less than the level of funding in 2002?
So part one of the question, I do support LGA. I mean, our district is a benefactor of that program completely, so I know we need to support that. The second part of your question, do we increase it $100 million? Well, that you have to do all the math. So does the $100 million that necessarily affect District 24? So I need more information on how that affects our district. In addition, is $100 million enough? Is it too much? I mean, what is the money used for? So we'd have to get some good information. And then also look at the actual funding formula within LGA and find out, is the formula itself accurate? Is it meeting today's needs? I mean, it was the Minnesota Miracle. So LGA was started as the Minnesota Miracle. It's going to be important for us to make certain that we're invested as all senators come together to say, what is the right amount? How is that right amount ascertained, and how do we invest that? So it'll be interesting to find out more.
Thank you. Mrs. Jensen?
Thank you. Two things that concern me with LGA. When it was first brought about, it was a tax relief program for disparity, meaning that there were certain areas in the state that did not have the tax base to provide basic services. So what they decided in the legislature at that time was that they would collect a 3% sales tax, and they're still collecting that sales tax now. So that's part of my concern is if they're still collecting that 3% sales tax, there has to be some look at, if we're talking about changing it, where does that sales tax go? Then just to the general fund? I have that concern. The other thing is part of that legislation included later on that cities would no longer be able to collect any kind of sales tax on their own if they needed it. They would have to present it to the legislature because the state was collecting already sales tax on their behalf, that they would also have to approve if the city wanted to collect it. So that's a concern I have as well. So those two things we need to take a look at. But as far as funding for LGA, cities in this district rely on that money. They're down to where they're going to have to cut into services. So the constituents and the voters in this district have to be aware, and this is what I would do as your legislator, make sure that you understand that if we cut LGA, what does that look like for you here? What services? What services are you willing to give up? What services are you willing to go without in order to make that happen? And we can do that as long as we understand that the money not coming from the state, even though they're collecting sales tax, will create cuts to services, or else your property taxes will go up.
Thank you. We'll turn to the House candidates with the same question. Mr. Petersburg, we'll start with you. And again, just to reiterate the questions, do you support the concept of LGA? And would you support increasing LGA by at least $100 million, which is still less than the level of funding in 2002?
There's no question that there's an important part of equalizing every community's ability to deal with the services that it needs to provide for its constituents and for its community members. It's part of the responsibility that I think the state has as well as providing for basic services to everybody. And until there's something better, I think LGA is the best option we have at this point. So I certainly do support the concept of LGA as it stands now. Does that mean we should be looking at options in the future that might improve upon it? Certainly, but that's down the road. Asking about whether or not you support a minimum of $100 million, again, I think Vern said it's important for us to know what the cost is. That may be not enough. Maybe there are ways in which we can come up with additional. There's no way to tell until you look at it, add into the mix. The difficulty with a lot of these issues is that when you look at health and human services and the school system taking up 80% of the budget, and you have to divide the remaining 20% into the rest of what services we provide, and everybody is being underfunded, then who do you look in the eye and say, I'm sorry, you're not getting the money? And so there has to be a priority developed. There has to be a process developed in which we know what are our goals, what are our strengths, what are the things that we need to do, what are things that we can maybe help other organizations or other entities take on some of the responsibility. So LGA needs to be expanded if we're going to keep up with what the need is. What the amount is, I don't know at this point.
Thank you. Mr. Brennan.
Well, I too definitely support LGA for our communities. It's vital. I mean, we're already paying into that. Why isn't the money coming back to us? Why is it being shifted from other areas? When they shift the monies to other areas, what are our priorities come back to us here? We have our local communities have to look at raising taxes, trying to keep up, cutting back services, doing with less with what we got. When we pay in to something, we should get those monies back to where they come from. Those monies that provide the public services that we need and depend upon for the day-to-day business that happens in our communities. That's the main thing. Let's look at what's right for our people. Insist upon it. When they take the monies away from us, we have to spend more out of our own pockets in our own home communities. That is not right. We need to look at that. We need to prioritize how we're going to do that. We have to also look at how we can be more efficient in our, not only local government, but state government with it. How do we find efficiencies to trim things that we know we can combine things? Maybe city and county can combine services together to deliver those services that we need and know that we want to have in our communities to make things more efficient for it. We can save monies that way. But LGA is a vital thing for those of us that live in outstate and greater Minnesota, because without that, where would we be? How are we going to provide those business opportunities, the educational opportunities, the things that we hold core to our values in our hometowns?
Thank you, Mr. Brennan, and you can keep the microphone. Any form of state property tax relief will, of course, cost the state money and potentially increase the projected $1.1 billion deficit. If you support providing state funds for property tax relief, how would you pay for it? Through increased revenues, cuts to other programs, more borrowing, some combination?
We've borrowed enough. We borrowed $2.4 billion from our schools. We put in bonding referendums for $800 million. I think we borrowed enough, and I think Minnesota has a spending problem. So how do we figure out how to maximize the dollars going in, build efficiencies, and look at soft costs within government and hard costs? When they buy a hammer, it's a hammer, but when it costs you X amount of dollars and so many things actually determine how that hammer was actually, that $13 hammer may cost $133 because of the process that it takes. I've seen that in corporate America, and I'm certain that government has a bureaucratic process that's not conducive to efficiencies. So finding out where the efficiencies are, but again, if we're gonna make any tax modification, it's the small business or the property tax for business is $1.6 billion a year. So if we were just to simply cut that without keeping the companies or the businesses responsible for creating good paying local jobs, so give me a job, we'll give you a tax credit, much like Job Z. Things like that need to be agreed upon in the state, because if you create more jobs, you create more economy. More economy will take care of itself. So if you create X amount of new thousands of jobs in the small business sector, but the majority of people live and work in the small business market. So this isn't aimed at the Walmarts and the Best Buys and the Targets, this is aimed at the majority of people. So we really need to make certain that the small businesses creating jobs do get tax relief, but only for good paying local jobs. Not just minimum wage jobs either, things that really do make a difference in people's homes.
Thank you. Same question, Mrs. Jensen.
Thank you. This is part of the reason why I decided to run for state senate. If we don't admit and be honest and talk about what our problem is when it comes to our budget, we just saw a slide presentation where it's going to be almost 4 billion deficit. 4 billion deficit. Property tax relief is going to be important, but balancing that budget is going to be more important. We need to do that first. But we have to admit that this is absolutely a problem for the entire state of Minnesota. But the policies that have been passed in the last couple of years, you also saw on these slideshows that Greater Minnesota has been impacted disproportionately throughout the state. So you need somebody that's going to take a look at how are these tax policies, especially if it's going to be statewide, what are the unintended consequences? Our property taxes went up because they passed a policy that impacted us greater because of where they focused those cuts. In Greater Minnesota, whether you're a Democrat, whether you're a Republican, whether you own a business, or whether you're looking for a job, or whether you're a student, you need somebody that's going to ask those questions, and we all have to come together to try to find some of those solutions. I'm willing to work with whoever it is that's going to be honest about the numbers that we're looking at, what it means to the people that live here. And if it means that we have to tax business and we have to tax individuals, well, we better be honest about it and we better let them know it because they're going to have to be the ones that pay that bill. So I'm all for cutting taxes, but I don't know how we can do that and be honest about it in face of $4 billion deficit. I don't know how that happens. So we need to send some people there that are willing to do that.
Thank you. Mr. Petersburg, the question to you. Again, if you support providing property tax relief from the state level, how would you pay for it? Would it be through increased revenues, cuts to other programs, more borrowing, or some combination?
I also believe that it's going to be some sort of combination, but I don't see increasing revenue as increasing taxes. There are other ways to increase revenue, and one of the ways is by promoting economic growth. Economic growth automatically increases our revenue and it deals with that. The problem is, whenever you're dealing with budgetary concerns, and this is something that counselors are telling people that have to deal with their own personal debt, you first got to know where the money's going. And right now, we're having a little bit of a challenge in one person viewing statistics one way and one viewing it another way, and not really knowing where all the money is going. Again, as we talked about before, if 80% of it is dealing with health and human services and school system, and that's our priority, the remaining 20% of it, which includes property tax relief, has come out of the middle. That's very difficult for us to be able to do. So I think we have to be looking at how do we maintain and stimulate our economy so that there's additional job growth, additional economy that will help relieve that. But that's not going to be the only answer. We're also going to have to understand that where we're cutting and what programs that we're going to be, let's use the word underfunding, that we find ways, that we find alternatives for those programs to maintain themselves. And we need to have everybody, and I think we just heard another example of why we need everybody on board. Because together as a state, we can accomplish it. Just a few people together, it's not going to happen.
Thank you. Mr. Brennan.
Well, I think we all agree that this is going to be a painful process for all of us across the state. There are no easy answers to this system and what we're doing. We've used one-time revenues, one-time monies. We've used shifts to try to balance our budget. Where does that put us? Deeper in debt. Because once those monies are gone, they're gone forever. It's a one-time shot you get. We need to be looking at broad-based planning for the future. One of the things I learned in my 30 years in the military was that when you look at your goal that you want to reach, you start at the top, where you want to end up, work your way back. While you're doing that, you set up benchmarks. So say we have a 15-year plan that we want to work towards to balance our budget across the state, get things back on board, get us back on the black side of things. We have to put benchmarks in every 2, 4, 8 years to make sure we're reaching that goal. While we're doing that from the broad base, as we go up, we continue to tweak the program that we have, make it more efficient, make it more user-friendly to guide us into the future. But to sit here and on a daily basis when we see things happening in our legislature, well, let's just do this right now. We'll pass it on to the next group of people that comes along. That is I can't fathom. I cannot fathom how we can do that. We're doing it to us, we're doing it to our children, we're doing it to our grandchildren. That needs to stop now. We need to be thinking about long-term with short-term goals in sight.
Thank you. For the next question, we'll start with Mr. Petersburg here on the House side. In the 2012 legislative session, lawmakers proposed a constitutional amendment requiring a supermajority vote in both House and Senate to raise taxes. Would you support or oppose efforts to amend the state constitution to limit the legislature's ability to raise revenue or increase state spending?
Would you repeat that last part of the question again?
Sure. Would you support or oppose efforts to amend the state constitution to limit the legislature's ability to raise revenue or increase state spending?
I think one of the challenges we have with that kind of amendment is the fact that when you do that, it really curtails the ability of the legislature to do what it was elected to do. You know, there's a certain part of us that say, let's just take the easy way out. But the reason why you're electing us, the reason why we're up here, is because we're being asked to do the tough decisions. We're asked to do the tough things. And if we don't do what is best for you, you vote us out and you ask somebody else to do it instead. And to say that you want to make it tougher for the legislature to do their job doesn't make a lot of sense. To say that it has to be by the constitutional change, whatever it needs to be done, is always going back to the model that we have used as our guide, as our rules for how we deal with each other and how we deal as a state, and say, you know, that needs to be fixed every 2 years or 4 years or whenever the decision is made. So I think rather than that, I would much rather support the fact that we have the ability as voters and as constituents to hold our legislators' feet to the fire and make them do the job that's necessary. So I would not be in support of that constitutional amendment.
Thank you. Mr. Brennan.
Well, I'm going to agree with John. Why would we want to do something that's going to restrict the things that we are elected to do in our legislature? The other thing I'm really worried about is that what happens as that metro area starts to grow. That ring gets bigger on a daily basis. There are more people coming into that ring than there are from our side here in Greater Minnesota. We put a constitutional amendment in there that said the supermajority is going to rule. Where will our voice be? Do you want to lose that voice? Do you want to lose that opportunity to say, hey, those of us in outstate Greater Minnesota know what's going on. We have those ideals. We cannot give those up. So placing an idea like this on a constitutional amendment is totally foreign to me, because our voice is equally important as that voice up in the metro area. And we need to make sure that we keep that voice here in outstate Minnesota for our people, for our constituents, for our communities.
Thank you. We'll go to our Senate candidates for the same question. We'll start actually with Mrs. Jensen. And again, the question is, would you support or oppose efforts to amend the state constitution to limit the legislature's ability to raise revenue or increase state spending?
I would oppose that. I agree full-heartedly with both the House candidates. Greater Minnesota has a hard time the way that it is right now to be a strong enough voice to get some of these things, and some of the current policy that we've seen on our taxes and LGA is evidence of that. So yes. Another thing is I serve on the school board, and I know it's not exactly the same type of policy, but to try to get voters, you know, from a commitment from the community has become very, very challenging in any way, because people just don't have the money. They just don't. So it's up to us as legislators to try to figure out how we're going to be equitable and make things fair for all people throughout the district, no matter if you're a business owner or where you're at in your life at that time. So I would oppose trying to put that type of extra burden on, especially when we're facing the issues that we're facing right now, when so many things are geared, the conversations we have are about taxes and money. So it would make it very difficult for us to do our job.
Thank you. Mr. Swedien.
Well, we have a quorum because I completely agree with all the candidates here. A supermajority rule would not be in the best interest of greater Minnesota. The largest voice becoming the metro area, and if, they have different opinions on what we would want, that would definitely create a minority voice on our side. And then you have to look at the other interest groups that support and lobby for that in those markets would really outweigh the voice of greater Minnesota. And this has been proven and effective in other states already. There's been analysis and study as states that have gone before us that have created supermajority rule. They didn't find any efficiency in that. And they did find that the city markets, the metro markets, actually did kind of use it to their advantage, and it did hurt the greater areas in those states. So I would oppose that.
Thank you. All right, so we've got consensus on that one. No, we're not done yet. Moving right along. We'll start this next question on the Senate side with Mrs. Jensen. And we've identified, as you heard in the presentation, 3 keys for economic development in Greater Minnesota via the Coalition of Greater Minnesota Cities: investment in infrastructure, access to capital, and job training, worker preparedness. This is a 2-part question. Which do you feel is most important for economic growth of those 3? And are there other areas you think the state should focus on to grow the economy in Greater Minnesota?
The choices were infrastructure.
Investment in infrastructure, access to capital, and job training, worker preparedness.
All of those things are very important. That's not an answer though. I have worked on some of these issues locally with the Public Policy Committee at the Chamber and through some of the work on the Board of Directors. I'm very proud of some of the things that we've done there. But also being an educator, I think one of the first things that we need to concentrate on, and the things that I hear from local businesses during that time, is that we need prepared workers for our local businesses. And they're interested in not just the skills, but some of the soft skills. Some of the soft skills need to be incorporated into our education system, and businesses are asking for that. I think that's something that we could do. The other part of the question was, what else would I do?
Yes, what other areas would you focus on to grow the economy?
Other areas. Those are the main areas that I always talk about, is that we need to do our infrastructure. We're going to talk about Highway 14 later, so I'm not going to talk about that. Access, oh, I know. One thing that would be very beneficial is mentors for new businesses, and of course we need to work on healthcare costs. As an insurance agent, I deal with a lot of people that want to move and do something on their own and can't afford that. So that's one thing that I know we have to work on nationally. We also can work on that at the state level, and we can work on that at the local level as well. At the state level, we need to absolutely try to find ways to reduce that cost so people can take that risk and start a business on their own, or switch from a job that they're currently in to another job, so that they're not at fear of losing the health care that they currently have, because people are making those lifetime decisions based on that.
Thank you. Mr. Swedien.
I'm really fond of the expansion of the angel investment tax program, and knowing that 88% of that money was spent in the metro markets shows that if we could induce angel investment in Greater Minnesota and flip that tide a little bit, I think that would be healthy. Vicki used, I'm sorry, Mrs. Jensen. So we've gotten so close. My apologies. the angel investment brings a mentoring program with that, because where they put their money, they put their time, and they put their effort, and they help stimulate. When I was 19 years old, a friend of mine in Northfield, well, not a friend of mine, a person in town, an affluent businessman, I went to a city hall meeting and they said, no, we already have a chemical lawn spraying company in our town. We don't need another one, and they wouldn't give me a tax permit. And one of the most affluent business people in that town stood up in the meeting and said, well, that's too bad, I just gave him all my business. What was your name again? Ernst Swedeen? Great, well, I just gave him all my business, so we're going to have to make certain he gets a permit, won't we? So he didn't even just simply invest in me at that moment. He invested in me over time, because I used to have to drive around with him for my little business meetings and my mentoring programs, and he shaped my young mind into saying, here's how you do things right, here's how you make certain that, you know, every time you do the math has to work. And I just love and admire the guy, and he showed me work ethic, and he showed me what mentoring really meant, and we need more of that in Minnesota.
Thank you. All right, and on the House side, we'll start with Mr. Brennan. Would you like me to read the question again?
Yes, please.
All right, we'll do that. There's been 3 key areas for economic development identified for Greater Minnesota: investment in infrastructure, access to capital, and job training, worker preparedness. Which do you feel is the most important for economic growth, and are there other areas that you think the state should focus on to grow the economy in Greater Minnesota?
Well, as a teacher, I know that when we bring new teachers into the system and the education, what do? We have a mentorship program. It's called student teaching. We assist those young people as they're coming out of college to get the skills, to learn the ideas, the technical things they need to do to go forward into their job after they graduate from college. Once they get that first job, what do now? We do the same thing. We mentor those people for 3 years in Waseca. They're mentored, they're guided, they're trained, they're taught. The education never stops. So a mentorship program, job training, getting our young people involved in a business and understanding and knowing and getting that hands-on experience is a key to getting them propelled into the future. And as Vern said too, the Angel Investment Fund is something we need to have working out here in our neck of the woods, in our communities in Minnesota. Not the metro are taking the monies from us, but get it involved here so our employers, our small business owners are able to use those monies to build their businesses up, to get those quality young people. There are programs across the state where, and it started with hospitals and clinics. Rural areas were having a heck of a time finding doctors. So what do? We'll pay you, we'll help you pay off your bills. You come to our community. What do they find out? That the cost of living, the quality of life in rural Minnesota and outstate Minnesota far supersedes the life that they would have been living in the metro area because of the quality of people that are already there that are willing to take care of the people. So that investment, getting things going again through that was the key.
Thank you. Mr. Petersburg.
It's a 2-part question, so I think we ought to get double the time, right? All right.
No.
I would like to go over with you all 3 answers, all 3 options, because all of them are very critical for this particular area. And other regions of the state might be different, but let's talk first about infrastructure and see if you come up with the same answer that I do. I'm sure we're going to get a conversation about Highway 14, but if that infrastructure isn't critical and key to this part of the state, I don't know what is. Access to capital. It doesn't matter what we do, if we don't have more jobs and a better economy, it's not going to grow. And so we have to have those jobs. When we look at job training and worker preparedness, I've talked to many industries and others that saying right now they aren't getting the qualified people to apply for the jobs for them to hire. They're having to spend more and more time developing their preparedness. So all 3 of them are important. But going back to job training, is that most important? Well, if we don't have the jobs, it really doesn't do us much good to repair out here in greater Minnesota because they're going to go to the cities. Infrastructure, if we have the infrastructure there, again, that makes businesses much better able to compete. But again, if we don't have more jobs and more of the economy here, that infrastructure also is just sitting there. So we need to provide capital for improvements of jobs and developing of economy, and to me that's the key. Whether it's through angel investment or the others, we need to do that. What are some of the areas that we can think about? Well, for me, I've been fighting this battle ever since I was on the school board with others, helping them to understand that greater Minnesota is an investment, and it's an investment that the larger metropolitan area needs to understand, because the more self-reliant we are out here, the less support that they'll have to give us. And if we don't do that, they're going to have to siphon even more of the revenue out to us. So they might as well support us and help us.
Thank you.
Goods and services transported across this state, we have to do it efficiently, we have to do it quickly and safely. When we moved to, my wife and family and I moved to Waseca, we took Old Highway 14 from Smith's Mill to Waseca. And if you've been on that road, driven that road at any good point in time, wow. And from Waseca to Owatonna, wow. The opening of new Highway 14 has created vast and incredible opportunities for our goods and services to move quickly and efficiently. Farm to market is also included in that. Our agricultural products are being able to move quickly and freely. The completion between Owatonna and Dodge Center is the next link in that. Moving things from one side of the state to the other. It's not Interstate 90, 30 miles south of here. That's the key. For our area, Highway 14 is what drives our local economy, what makes things happen. The hub that happens here with I-35 and 14 is huge for Owatonna. Completing this link is big. On a personal note, we had an issue in Waseca. Our daughter was on highway coming home one day from school, crossing Highway 14, so I pulled up alongside of her. She thought it was clear, she pulled up, bang, hit by a semi. Highway 14, getting it out of our communities and on the edges of our communities, making sure that things are safe, and good roads are key to where we're going to be for the future of our area. Drive that forward, make sure it happens for us to improve our local economies.
Thank you. Mr. Petersburg.
When do you feel the expansion of I-14 should be completed? I think 10 years ago was late enough. The reality is that when I graduated from high school, and I'm sorry this is going to tell my age, but in 1970, everybody said, oh, the road will be completed from Rochester to Mankato later by the year 2000 for sure. We're now 12 years past that. And give me a break. It's because we've not made good decisions at the legislature. We've had other infrastructure needs, and the money has gone elsewhere. The reality is that is by far the most critical thing to this economy in this area. If you look at the corridor between Mankato and Rochester, and Owatonna being the hub in there, and the potential growth for here, even Faribault, it's just amazing. And it's an area in which can really help the boom in the economy in the state. So it's not just about this region, it's also about the state economy as well. And in matter of fact, we need to do that. The difficulty is that at today's cost, we're running somewhere around $10 million a mile. So the 16 miles between here and Dodge Center is 165 million. The 22 miles over and on the other side of Mankato is closer to 250 million or more. Right now, the district of Rochester's district for the Highway 14 only gets $50 million a year in order to fund it. So the only way it's going to happen is through the bonding formulas and so forth. That's going to be real difficult. We're going to have to make sure that we're committed to do that and be willing to stand up and do that. If we don't get it on the 20-year plan by January of this year, it could be off. And so it's very critical that we keep maintaining that.
Thank you. Same question. We'll start with Mr. Swadin. Again, when do you feel the expansion of Highway 14 should be completed?
I agree with John, 10 years ago, or even 20 years ago. If you look at the original funding value, it was about $190 million to complete it from Rochester all the way to New Ulm. And because they've only done, small chunks and not created a monolithic 4-lane from New Ulm to Rochester, those costs, the cost just to finish the piece from Dodge Center to Owatonna now is about the same price as the original cost to do the thing entirely. And so I agree, 10, 20 years ago would have been great, we would have saved a lot of money. And the issue is that if the DOT, if the Minnesota DOT doesn't agree now that this is a priority, and they're already kind of saying that this isn't the priority, we're going to do different things, if we don't bring those two departments, so Mankato and Rochester, both Region 6 and Region 7 or whatever it is, bring them together and have that conversation to help stimulate and influence the value of that, because double the lives on those lanes being lost, what's that cost? I'd like them to answer that for me. And if we wait 20 more years, is it going to cost $20 or $20 million a mile? So are we going to pay double the cost and be subject to double the lives lost in this section of corridor? And I think they need to answer for that.
Thank you. Mrs. Jensen.
I attended the opening of Highway 14 from here to Waseca, and one of our past representatives, Tom Shea, was there, and we were looking at his campaign material from, I think it was 1980 something, and he had put in there that if this isn't completed, this is outrageous. So I think it's outrageous that it hasn't been completed yet. But I do understand, as far as costs, that in our region, the MnDOT region, our transportation region, we have the most interstate miles in the state. And that kind of struck me, that a lot of our money goes towards that. And we have bridges, a lot of bridges, because our region goes all the way over to the Mississippi River, and when the bridge collapsed in Minneapolis, a lot of our funds got diverted because of that. So there are a lot of things that are being funded throughout the state, and the way that they work, the MnDOT system, we're kind of on the bottom end, and we have some of the oldest roads in the state because of that. So this is a bigger systemic problem on how we fund, how we build our infrastructure, and how we make those things happen, get completed. That is something that I'm very interested in working on. I sat and watched a committee where the committee chair, the transportation committee chair, said, well, we've never stepped in and made any decisions in regards to how MnDOT prioritizes their projects. That's an issue to me. That's a problem to me, and we need to try to assist and make that different. And that's something that I would work on. Absolutely, we need an east-west corridor that goes all the way across. Economically, for our cities and for this part of the state, I would work with current legislators, the Highway 14 partnership, all of those things with people. There's a lot of really good people that have worked on this for a really long time.
Thank you. Thank you. We'll stay on the Senate side. We're on question 7 of 9, so we're getting there. Questions prepared by the Coalition of Greater Minnesota Cities. We're going to stay on the Highway 14 project, and this is directed to you, Mr. Sweeney. Will you support the policies and funding necessary to complete the 4-lane expansion of US Highway 14 between Dodge Center and Owatonna? Specifically, what will you do to advocate for this project to legislators, governor, MnDOT, etc., to move this legislation forward?
Well, I partly answered that the first time. Creating collaboration means that all parties have to be present. So having the both regions, because they're split right now on where the funding on 14 wants to go, whether it's from North Mankato to New Ulm or whether it's from Owatonna to Dodge Center. So bringing those two together and having that conversation and having our governor involved and the Highway 14 Coalition all in the same place and talking about, the cost associated, because we're not saying that we don't want it done, but if they're putting us out to pasture for 20 more years, that cost is going to double or be greater. So please help us understand why would it be okay to pay double the cost in the future than rather just settling it and getting it done now. So for building the opportunity to bring people together, have real information from everyone associated and influencing that. They say leadership is influence, nothing more, nothing less. Our state senators should be the greatest of influencers, those that can sit down and ask questions and have real information to say, hey, this is what we need to do differently, and help stimulate those conversations. And apparently, we haven't done that to the point of having an end-to-end solution, that east-west corridor, complete. So now is the time to influence at the greater rate now. So time is not on our side, because we only have 6 months until they have to have the plan. So it's important that, you know, we can go to work right away. Once elected, I mean, whoever's in office, I mean, it's their job to really sit down and go to work right away. Don't wait to get sworn in. Let's go have some conversations. So,
Thank you. Same question, Mrs. Jensen.
Yes, that's great. I wasn't finished the last time, and it kind of segues right into it. There have been a lot of good people that have worked really hard to try to get Highway 14 completed. Highway 14 partnership includes townships, cities, many people. I would work to try to get Rochester included in that. I think they have a stake in it, since it is on the way to Rochester, and it would help them economically too. I would work on that. Part of the problem is we have a part-time legislature, and we voted to put the control of the money for the transportation department. That doesn't come out of our general fund. That is controlled by the transportation area, MnDOT. So that is part of the reason why the legislature says we're not going to step in and put their priorities. But they've changed their focus. That's why we're going to fall off the 20-year plan. They've gone from safety issues to congestion issues. They're going to work on congestion issues. I would advocate for, if we want to clear up some congestion issues, build some infrastructure down here so that people aren't always moving up there and to bigger cities causing all those problems. We can do that. We can say that. We can say we need to build that infrastructure so that people have access to the roads that they need, so the businesses can come down here and we can get good jobs here, and that people won't be moving away. Great way to stop the congestion issue. I would also work with the current legislators that have been working on this, Mankato and different areas. We'd have to come together, and it wouldn't have to, it doesn't matter whether you're Republican or Democrat. This is a greater Minnesota issue, and it's absolutely something that they've been doing very well, working on together, and I would continue that the best that I could.
Thank you. Same question down to the House side. We'll start with Mr. Petersburg. I think you've stated you're in support of the expansion, but how you would go about it is the question.
All right. I certainly do support it, and I think one of the ways we do it is we have to think outside the box. We've been trying this, and other legislators have been trying it, and obviously the way we've been going about it hasn't worked, and the likelihood of just keep doing what we've been doing probably isn't going to work either. So one of the things that I look at is I look at all of the possibilities, all of the people, all of the players that have a potential stake in how the impact of Highway 14 might be here. That means the Department of Economic Development, employment. We need to help educate the federal government, who has money that can go to this at least once in a while when they're not spending it all elsewhere. And we need to look at the greater Minnesota organizations throughout the state, and we need to help get all of us all on the same page. Sometimes we have one group fighting against the other group and so forth, but the reality is that together we can accomplish a lot. And it really is important for us to know that there are priorities out there, and if we educate and help people understand what's important here and know that we will also support them later in other activities that are important for them, it makes us all part of the same state, of the same group, and we are able to accomplish a lot. As I said before, 160 million here and 250 over there, that's $400 million. That's almost more than the whole bonding bill is every biennium. So we're going to have to do it in phases, or we're going to have to find alternative resources and funding, which I think are possible, again, if we all work at it together.
Thank you. Mr. Brennan.
Well, I see some of the people here that have spent many hours and many years working to get this Highway 14 completed. They got one part done. We're looking at the last part of it. We need to make sure that we get a groundswell of support of people, not those people who have been fighting it continuously day after day, month after month, year after year, but we need to get backing of the people. We need to voice the people that go up and say, hey, this is important to our area. As a one-person voice going up there, you have a little bit of, you have a little bit of an edge. But when you bring the strength of a group together, that people will say, hey, this is a concern that's going on. We need to get behind the leaders that are championing the ideas, bringing those forth, to make them understand that the needs for Greater Minnesota are just as valuable as the needs for the metro area. I keep looking back at that. We keep getting less, they keep getting more. We need to be the vocal aspect of getting things done. Highway 14 is critical to our economy, to our safety of our families, all those issues, but we need to make sure that we have a unified voice, and the voice has to be strong across the board, going up. Bring busloads of people, say, this is important to what we've got going on. We can talk about it. Then we take all those people that have the best ideas that are working with MnDOT, with our legislators, with our governor, sit down and say, here's the reasons why we need Highway 14 to be a viable, safe place in our district and for our state.
Thank you. Mr. Brennan, we'll stay with you for the next question. Legislators often get pressure from their caucus to vote within the team, so to speak, even when it's contrary to what that legislator might believe is right. Describe a situation where you stood up to peer pressure, an authority figure, to do what was right.
Well, every once in a while you get the, when I was in the military, you get an order to do something, and you have to assess, is it morally right? Is it the right thing to do? There was a time in my life where I stood up to my superior and said, there's no way that I can do that based upon the convictions that are out there, the moral rights, the moral things to do. Being able to stand up and do those things and not be afraid of the repercussions that could happen. If you're afraid of the repercussions that are going to happen, then you better get out of the road. My grandfather told us, all us kids, as we were growing up, he said to me, he said, Craig, when you go out into the world, make sure that whatever you say and whatever you do, that you put your face behind it, your name behind it, because people are going to see right through you if you don't have the convictions of what you believe in. I've taken that with me every place I go. Has it gotten me in trouble at times? Yeah. But I stand to that every day. I will stand to my convictions. I will do what I believe is right for the people that I serve. That is my main goal, is to do what is right for the people I will be serving. I believe in it. I'll stand behind it, and I won't back down from the fight that says, well, you should be going with us, but this is not right for the greater good of the people of Minnesota. That is what is most important to me. It's most important to you. It's most important for our state.
Thank you. Mr. Petersburg, same question.
I will share with you what happened when I did that as an elected official. When I was on the school board over at Claremont, the last 2 years we had joined together, became Triton. And during that time we were looking at efficiencies, we were looking at ways of cutting costs, but we were also looking at safety and how to best handle the needs of our school children that were there. West Concord school system at that time had a building that was built in 1895, 96, something like that. It had 6-foot wide stairwells in it that were wooden, had been pretty much condemned by the fire department for a long time. And I looked around and knew that we had enough capacity in the other school districts to be able to handle their children. And so at a meeting, I moved that we close that school in the following year. It would have saved the district at that time a minimum of $100,000 just in upkeep and maintenance and so forth. And it was something that was for the safety of the kids. And of course, I was voted down narrowly, but it was voted down, and I stood my ground, and that was in September. November, the election came around, and I was not reelected. Mainly because of that. Wisconsin made sure that I didn't get elected. But the reason why I bring that up is because I no longer worry about that, because the following year, the school district then had the same vote and voted to close it. So the reality is, in my opinion, is that when you deal with policy, if you're right, eventually that is corrected. If you're wrong, then the majority and what was the proper decision. In either case, the process works. Our system works, and you out there make it work. So I have no compulsion about standing up for what I need to.
Thank you. We'll move to the Senate side. We'll start with Mrs. Jensen. Same question. Describe a situation where you stood up to an authority figure or peer pressure to do what was right.
Well, the most recent example that I can think of is during my time on the school board, we were faced with making $1.8 million of cuts, which when you serve on the school board, parents, when you're making decisions about people's kids, it's extremely personal. And we had taken a vote to exclude the taxpayers in the community in helping make that decision, or at least being involved. That bothered me greatly. We needed to include them. So I said during the meeting, I want to meet with people in the public. You can come and meet with me. I gave them a location, and they showed up. It was difficult. It's a difficult thing to do, to step out of the box, to stand up, to say. It would have been a lot easier for me to say, okay, that was the vote, that's the majority vote, and I'm done. But when it comes to governance, when it comes to policy, if you're not trusting something, if you're not understanding something, you have to be able to ask those questions, and you have to be able to move forward. I completely understand that we're not going to make the big kind of changes that we need all at one time. You have to pick something and move, and as long as you keep moving it forward a little at a time. So when I look at policy too, I always look at what is it intended to do? Do we want it to do that? Is it going to do that? And how can we make it better? So for me, I don't have an issue or a problem moving forward with something that might be a little bit difficult, that might be a little bit difficult to explain to everyone, but I will absolutely be able to tell you why I did what I did and how it helped me in my decision-making process. Throughout that process, I also met with teachers in their classroom. I went to every single school. I went to the kids asked me to come to their classroom, so I was in the classroom. I was in the community talking with people, and that's how I would make my decisions at the state.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Sweeney.
So I facilitate a values training process. And a lot of companies don't really have a values statement. And I always say that's the foundation to our daily activity. So we start out with this process of 64 core values. And I tell them, and I sit them down, and we go through this worksheet process, and I tell them, circle the 12 things that are most important to you. And they all do that, and they labor through the process to find out, well, out of all this information, what's the most important, and they circle the 12. And when they feel confident and successful, I tell them, that's great. Now get rid of 6 of those. And then they have to really work hard to figure out, well, which is most important out of these 12. And when they think they're finally complete, I tell them, now get rid of 3 of those. And when they do that, it's a long process. People really go through this and labor through that. But when they understand their core values, it allows them every day to not deviate. So when you have core values, it allows you to stay focused with clear vision. And I don't have a political background. I'm a business guy, a block player's kid. So we took one of the largest corporations in the country that we've been working with under contract for 12 years, and we disagreed on something, and it was generating hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue, and we fired them. We were the first distribution partner in the history of that business group to fire that company. And we did it because of a core value, alignment of what we wanted to do and who we wanted to serve and where we wanted to do that. So we gave up a lot of revenue and kept to our core values. And we're very proud of that decision to this very day.
Thank you. Candidates, we're to our final question before closing statements. So you're almost there. We're going to start actually on the Senate side. We'll start with Mrs. Jensen on this question. What is one difference between you and your opponent that would make you better suited to serve the residents of this district in the legislature?
I've been talking about it all evening, and I hope you can understand that I've been working on the policy issues within this local district because I care about this district. And I want to understand, and I understand how the policies that they're passing affect the people that live here. Everybody has a situation where you feel the need that something's wrong, or that you think you can add something to it. But I've acted on that. I've acted on that with the belief that I can make a difference. And I would act on that, and that's why I'm running for Senate, is because I believe that I can use the experience and the talents I have to go to the state and represent you. And by listening and taking those concerns and bringing them up to the Capitol, that's what I've been doing. I've been advocating for family farms. I've been advocating for the diversity that we face within this issue as legislative chair of Minnesota Businesswomen. That's not because I ever thought that I would run for Senate. That's because I care about those issues. I'm passionate about it, and I understand that the policies that we pass impact people that live here. And we need somebody that's going to carry a voice and make sure that they do the things that they think are going to be beneficial, and come back and explain why. Why are we faced with this and how it's going to impact you.
Thank you. Mr. Swedin.
Because it's my first run at politics, I'm leaning on a lot of business experience. And because I've worked with multi-billion-dollar companies, I don't get caught up in a lot of rhetoric or conversation around good policy first. I'm very much, let's do the math first. Let's make certain that the math does work. And I've grown up here my whole life. I understand greater Minnesota, have no desire to move into the metro markets. So I care about and love the people here. I work as an outreach director in our church because I want to affect people's lives. And government's only mandated to do two things in our Constitution, and one is to provide education dollars and from a funding perspective is education and health and human services. And I've had a ton of adversity growing up, so I know what it's like to be one of those families that doesn't have a full meal every day. And I know the successes of business, and I know where there's that compromise in life to make certain that we always are focused on doing the right thing. And I have a leadership bias in everything that I do. So I look at things from a leadership perspective. In the Harvard Business Review, they asked what the top qualities of leaders were. And the #1 response from the top leaders in the United States that they interviewed was their ability to create and to see further faster. And I do that exceptionally well. So please vote for me on November 6th.
Thank you. And we'll move to the House side. We'll start actually with Mr. Petersburg. Same question. What is one difference between you and your opponent that would make you better suited to serve the residents of this district in the legislature?
I believe that my experience and my knowledge of this district, my abilities that have been created by this district give me an edge. It gives me an opportunity to have learned how to be inclusive with people, to provide the leadership in order to be able to bring people together. When I think about I wouldn't want out of a legislator. It'd be somebody that not only knows the right answer, but knows how to get the job done and knows how to bring people together to accomplish it in a way that is not alienating, but one that bolsters growth and understanding and the ability to just feel good about what's going on in the state. We've had so much partisan politics and negative stuff that I think it's important for us to get back to the point that we're all in this together. And my ability through the church and through what I've done there, and you can ask people from Trinity if you know any about me. I trust you out there, and I trust my experience that it will certainly carry me through to do a great job of the state legislature.
Thank you. Mr. Brennan.
Well, I've spent the vast majority of my life serving other people, serving the state, serving the nation in one form or another. Service has been my life. It's giving back to the people that you live with day to day, giving back with no compunction of whether I'm going to get something back for it or not. My goal is the selfless service aspect of what we do. That's who I am. My wife will attest to that. There's been many times when I've spent more time at school with my students than I spent with my family. Why? Because I care about those people. I care about the people that are out there. We need people who are willing to sit down and care about all the people across our district, all the people across our state. They're willing to listen, they want to listen, to want to gather the ideas from everybody to bring something forth that we can all work with for our future. So I bring that selfless service aspect to what we want to do for our government, because I will work tirelessly to make sure that I'm working for the right ideals of the people of District 24A.
Thank you. You all were very nice to each other. We're moving on to our closing comments here. You each have 2 minutes for your closing statements, just as the rest of the questions. And we'll start here with Mr. Petersburg.
You've heard a lot about service out there, and I think all of us are really interested in serving this district. We aren't doing this because it's something that we get a lot of accolades for. If you've been door knocking with any of us, you know that sometimes that's the opposite. We do it because we do have a passion for helping and serving people, and I think that's true of all of us here. I'm very commending all of us here. But the reality is that you need to choose someone. And you need to choose the person that you think will best represent you, the one that you think is going to work the hardest. And I ask you to review my background. I ask you to review who I am, and determine that for yourself. I believe that I have the ability to be able to get people together and get the job done. I believe I have the insights and the knowledge of this district to be able to represent us the best up at the Minnesota Capitol. And I think I have a way of gathering support by people around me that makes us united as well. And I also have the great desire to communicate with each of you. We as legislators in the past have not done a very good job of bringing what's happening up the legislature back to you. And that's kind of our problem. And we need to do a better job of that. So I believe in all of those aspects I will be a great candidate. So I again ask you for your support come November 6th. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Brennan.
Well, you've probably seen it already, but I believe in the 3 C's. Stronger communities are built through communication and cooperation. Throughout my life, I've been the person that's willing to cooperate with the people and get things done. We need people that want to sit down and talk about the issues, lay out their cards, and work together. Working together is a key. I will be that strong voice that says, for Greater Minnesota, for the Owatonna, the Wasicas of our state, that says, those of us who live out here need to have equality with what happens in the metro area. We cannot take that back seat anymore. We need to have that strong voice that says, this is what's right for us. If it's right for us, it's going to be good for the greater part of our state also, and it's going to benefit not only those of us in the outlying areas, but the metro area as well. We've not been strong enough across the state. I will be that person that says, hey, let's sit down and think about, gather that coalition of people from across Minnesota, from the outstate areas, the outlying areas outside the metro area, and say, let's do something we know is going to be a benefit for all of us. When it benefit all of us, we're all going to strengthen up. We can do the things that we're going to be strong for the entire state. But we cannot take that back seat anymore to what's happening up in the metro area. We need to have that strong voice going forward. Remember the 3 C's. Stronger communities that build through communication and cooperation. I'm asking your vote for your vote on November 6th.
Thank you. Mr. Sweeney?
It's real simple to me. I have a lot of energy. I like to work hard, so I was born in the 70s, and you know, through the whole entrepreneurial career and serving as a president in Rochester, Minnesota for the last 13 years at a family business, I've generated the ability to always keep the priorities the focus. And as a natural facilitator, my job is to make people come together and agree on priorities. Because everything seems really important, but there's only a few things that can be set as the priorities. I also believe that I'll find more inefficiencies in government than most, simply because of my background. Working with multi-billion-dollar companies puts you to task to find huge inefficiencies, huge gaps, and having that experience really brings something new to government. And I'm going to focus on what creates good paying local jobs, because that's how economies grow. We can tax people all we want. I mean, the highest taxed state in the United States has a $20 billion deficit, so just taxing more isn't always the answer. So having the ability to create and be creative and meet with people. The session is only, you know, a short period of time through the year. I'm not wired that way. We'll meet in the session, but then we'll go and mine ideas all year round. Meet with people and engage people and help build new ideas. And I have the energy and the creativity to do that. Vote for her.
Thank you. Mrs. Jensen?
Thank you. I'm Vicki Jensen. Most importantly, I'm a wife and a mother. Those are high priorities. And you do have a choice to make. I would hope that you can see the passion that I have for the community, for the people that live here, and for my ability to take that experience and knowledge to the state and to keep you in mind when we have to make the tough decisions that we have to face. We're looking at huge deficit, an education system that's underfunded, businesses that are nervous and worried and concerned about regulations. We have to look at those. What business people need is stability in their taxes, stability in people having enough money to buy the product that they're trying to sell. We have to take a look at all of those things. All you have to do for me is just even looking at my family, my parents. What are they faced with? We lost my dad last year. She had savings. She had my dad was 50 years in elevator business, 401k, right during the crash, the recession. She's faced with not enough money to live. We're all trying to provide for our family. Whether you're a business owner, or you're working in your chosen profession, or you're a student, or you're looking for work, we're a senior, you're retired, wherever you are, you're just trying to do the best that you can to provide for yourself and your family. You need a legislator, you need a senator that has that in mind all the time and pass the policies that make that happen, or at least be able to explain to you why you have to do the things to make this work.
Thank you. Thank you, candidates. Let's hear it for the candidates. Thank you to the audience. You guys were great listeners. And thank you to the candidates for stepping forward into these very important positions. Remember to vote on November 6th, and have a great evening. Thank you. Good job. Thank you.